Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
We're 2 years into the Task Force on Education's 5-year plan, and we're starting to see small impacts of a major shift in education funding and policy.
Is that enough to move the needle in Idaho's schools and our taxpayer dollars being well spent? This week, we devote the entire program to Idaho's K-12 education system.
Are students learning how to read?
Are they prepared for college?
And in 15 years, will Idaho have the workforce it needs?
Or is it far too early to make that determination?
I'm Melissa Davlin.
And I'm Aaron Coons. Idaho Reports starts now.
Welcome to Idaho Reports. On the show this week, Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News and Superintendent Dr. Don Coberly of the Boise School District joined Betsy Russell to discuss the current state of Idaho's education system.
The career ladder, teacher evaluations, and the new third grade literacy initiative, a lot has been taking place in education this year. And when the 2017 legislature starts, lawmakers will be asked to add almost $58 million more into education for teacher pay.
Recent controversy over teacher evaluations, skepticism about the funding model, and questions about whether the career ladder is really moving the needle on teacher retention are setting the stage for some contentious fights. But before we can get to that, let's get you caught up on the week.
Sally Boynton-Brown tells Idaho Reports that she intends to run for the Democratic National Chair. As of right now, she's the only woman who's publicly stated her intention to do so. Brown is currently the executive director of the Idaho Democratic Party and has worked in politics for over a decade. If you want to learn more about the woman who wants to be the National Democratic Chair, check out our blog for more, including a sit-down interview with Sally Boynton-Brown.
The Democrats aren't the only ones entertaining the idea of positions in D.C. In the last 2 weeks, we've heard speculation about Trump's transition team vetting Governor Otter for Secretary of Ag, Representative Labrador meeting at Trump Tower, and Chairman Steve Yates' involvement in the president-elect's call with Taiwan's president. And who knows, there are probably a few precinct committeemen who still think they have a chance at a Beltway gig. We're taking a break from TV for the holidays, but if any of these Republicans' dreams come true, we will still be actively reporting and analyzing the moves on our blog and in web extras throughout the next 2 weeks before we return on January 6th. So if you just can't live without Idaho Reports, don't worry, you won't have to.
Last year, Idaho put more than $11 million into literacy education, and in the spring, Superintendent Sherry Ibarra will ask for another $7.9 million. This fall, we teamed up with Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News to find out how Idaho kids stack up in reading and areas where Idaho could be doing better.
Body strong. Go, G-O, go.
There's no silver bullet when it comes to literacy.
Kids aren't that easy. People aren't that easy. You know, I have a PhD in literacy instruction, and we still get students in the literacy lab who I, sit and pause and have to call my colleagues at the universities and find research. There's not a magic bullet for reading, and that's something that I think a lot of people have a misconception about.
Bizarre?
Bizarre.
You know what bizarre means?
It's where you go crazy.
Yeah.
Too many factors enter into the equation, from genetics to the classroom, even to the parents.
There's influences from everything. There's influences from parents, your neighborhood, your school you're going to, the biology you were born with. Yeah, there are a lot of influences on kids' development.
So we're already thinking about how we can compare and contrast some of the things we're going to learn.
It's hard to put together a framework for what a good literacy environment looks like. But often, you know it when you see it. And you can see it in McCall Donnelly.
What do we do for that? What do we do, remember?
We start with the baby steps. We start with letter names, letter sounds, and then we work on fluency. So we start doing them much faster, and then we start putting them together. So we spend a lot of time on phonemic awareness, and then the fluency piece, and then comprehension, sort of putting it all together, but we do little baby steps along the way.
I'm going to do it and then you write it over mine, okay?
And then the other critical component to it are short and frequent assessments, with which we use to then reconfigure those groups about every 4 to 6 weeks.
And then we also progress monitor so that we can see where kiddos' skills are at in accordance with standards.
So the assessment for learning that we talk about, teachers are doing that constantly. You know, and you're reading your classroom, you're looking for engagement, you're quick thumbs up or check in or whatever. The assessment for learning should be happening constantly all the time. If you wait until the end of the year to look at the summative assessment results, it's probably too late.
Oh, there you go. And then we design interventions to help them meet that skill as well as knowing what's coming up so that we can help pre-teach that for them.
So it's a super dynamic process within which the students are regularly changing groups. And years ago we had one of our groups, we were having our team meeting, we were looking at the results, and the entire group didn't make progress. And there's no ego involved. The teacher changed. We changed the teacher. That teacher wasn't effective with that group. That's okay. It's all about the kids. It's all about helping them, and we'll do whatever it takes.
Good job. This one. Perfect.
School leadership is critical. It can occur within a grade level of 2 or 3, 4 teachers that work really well together and find the time to solve problems together. It can work within a school with even a week leader when teachers come together. So it can be bottom up or grassroots level, but it's so much easier and so much more efficient when the school leader is actively thinking about how can I help my teachers do better.
It's that data-driven collaboration, combined with internal accountability, that has put McCall-Donnelly School District at the top of the literacy list for non-charter public schools. They scored 72% proficient or advanced on the English language section of the 2016 SBAC test. Superintendent Foudy gives a lot of credit to their all-day kindergarten interventions.
We have an amazing board and an amazing community that has allowed our school for the last 10 years to do intervention groups with kindergartners who their skills are a little bit behind maybe where they should be. And so what we do is we have those kiddos stay all day and we have them in small groups. Small group is the best way to teach kiddos. And so we do small groups, but more importantly, we do the whole kiddo.
If we had the resource to run full-day kindergarten for everybody, we absolutely would. I think almost 80% of the country participates in a full-day kindergarten program for all children.
What letter? X. Okay, can you find where that goes?
But by doing that and really taking that time now, first grade teachers thank us, second grade teachers, because what happens is kiddos get those skills now before they ever get upset or down on themselves for not knowing how to do something.
McCall-Donnelly tries to catch them up quickly because those fundamental skills that kiddos either have or don't have when they enter the classroom cascade through the rest of their scholastic career. The state is focused on third grade literacy scores, primarily because that's the last time students can get away with not knowing how to read or write.
And then we're going to write it on our board.
There is a trend, a child coming into kindergarten with a low vocabulary or some sort of reading problem oftentimes manifests that at the end of third grade and then continues on through the grades and continues to lag behind on vocabulary development and so on and so forth.
And I think they've done studies to show that if you're not on grade level by that, the chances of you ending up in prison they've tracked that as well. Starting fourth grade, the intensity of content area reading is really heavy.
He left his brother Bob in charge of the animals.
The state has invested $11 million to make sure kids are ready for that fourth grade. Local school districts have created plans to stop the domino effects before they start. But the plans are varied, to say the least. Schools craft their own literacy plans, making pretty much every school a pilot school. But those districts will have a financial co-pilot, their Title I money.
They tripled the money. It's a significant amount that went into it for sure. And it's definitely helping. But it's not a comprehensive program. I mean, you have to use Title I funds. You have to use additional funds to make it work.
Idaho gets about $44 million in Title I money, about 4 times that lit budget. That disparity will probably put some sideboards on how daring the experimentation will be. But daring or not, it will take time to find out if it works.
Freeze, say with me. Red, freeze, red.
We're not going to see the results necessarily at the end of the first year. We have to have a long view for this.
The investments that we have made in the governor's task force recommendations, we know they take time to see if they're going to work. So, for example, the career ladder's been in place for about 3 years now. It's fair to ask, is this helping us with recruitment and retention of teachers? It's too early to ask that question yet of the literacy money. We hope that it's being put to good use. But if there are concerns that arise, for example, with the leadership premiums, those were never intended to go to each teacher. Those were intended to go out to teachers who were doing extra duties or extra work. And when that turned out to not be the case, we had to make an adjustment in that legislation. So certainly literacy will fall in that same category. If we, after a year or 2 or 3, realize we haven't moved the needle on our reading grade level scores, we will definitely need to take a look at that and see how we need to change our policy to get different results.
You want to do what, why, where, who, how, when?
What should those metrics be for that policy? Right now, it's just what Representative Horman said. Look at the program and decide whether or not it moved the needle. On the 2016 SBAC test, a little under half of 3rd graders received proficient or advanced scores. By the time they got to high school, that number had risen to 63%. But research puts a gloomy spin on those numbers.
60% of our kids are going to learn to read no matter how you teach them. And then there's the 20%, and of that 20%, 40%, I can't do my math. Of that 40%, 20 are going to need a more structured, intentional approach, and then another 20 is going to need intervention.
Hopping down the path, maybe?
Sure, yeah.
If 60% is a baseline, and 20% should be easily reachable, any number below 80% seems like a disappointment for Idaho.
Are we doing a good job?
No. Wow. Yeah, I think we talk about setting realistic goals, and we set realistic goals. But in the back of my head, we're always going after 100%. How do you get to 100%?
What's that word? Life. Here we go. Let's ride.
You mentioned 60%. We're going to learn to read anyway. But the 40%, that population, they're critical as well. I mean, the one student that doesn't graduate from high school and either find a professional technical route or a pathway to college, they're going to cost taxpayers a significant amount of dollars over the course of their life. You know, I've seen estimates as high as $500,000 that one person is going to cost taxpayers because they weren't becoming contributing members of society in a way where they're paying taxes, and they might even be like taxing society through social services or the penal system. So we have a vested interest in reaching every single student. It's a big deal.
Policymakers are doing their own assessments on school progress. They want to see more students being reached, and they're reevaluating some of the fundamental interventions they thought would help education, like the career ladder.
It angers me because we're investing so much in the career ladder, it's not going to have any impact on outcomes. It's not. Will it help us recruitment and retention? Maybe, I hope. Superintendents are telling me anecdotally the answer is no. Okay, so
what are we paying for?
What are we buying then? Yeah.
And joining us today for the Penance, we have Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News, Superintendent Don Coberly of the Boise School District, and Betsy Russell of the Spokesman Review. So, Kevin, we just heard Representative Wendy Corman, who's a member of JFAC, kind of express some doubt as to whether some of these education investments are the right thing. Moving forward, when it comes to literacy, when it comes to the task force recommendations as a whole, where are we and what are the concerns for this next session?
Well, I think where we are is that we're just getting started. The $11 million just went out to school districts in October. Districts are just starting to roll out their plans, and those plans vary widely. I mean, some districts are looking at trying to expand kindergarten or go to all-day kindergarten or do summer programs, which obviously won't go into effect for several months. Others are looking at adding staff or adding training or upgrading technology. So you've got all this stuff going on. And you're not going to see any change in results or new results until you get the spring Idaho Reading Indicator scores, and those won't come out until after the legislative session. So where we are right now is the program is in its infancy, and school districts from Boise and beyond are trying to implement and trying to ramp up and roll out. And the legislature is going to come to town next month, and they're going to have to decide how much to put into this going forward, without any hard numbers, because the hard numbers are going to come months and years down the road.
The new infusion of money into literacy is much needed, and I think, you know, Kevin was referring to the fact that the plans differ by district widely. Well, I think that makes sense. Different districts have different needs. So, for example, in Boise, 65% of our kids that are 1s and 2s on the RI, not at grade level, are either limited English or special ed. Now, every district has a certain percentage of special needs students, but the limited English is a little different in Boise in that about half of our LAP kids are refugees. And so it's a totally different approach with a student that doesn't know the English language than it is with a student that has grown up in Boise or in Idaho.
Do teachers have the tools that they need to make those assessments in the classroom with the resources that they have right now?
In terms of assessing issues and diagnosing, I think we're in pretty good shape there, and especially in our district where we do have a reading specialist in every building.
But if you're in ARCO, say?
Well, I mean, the resources are a little bit different in a district like ARCO, and Boise's funding is a little bit different as well. So when you look at a district like Butte County, where ARCO is, they have some federal funding, some Title I funding that's appropriated for the purpose of dealing with your free and reduced population. And then now they have some money from the state as well. So they're certainly going to be able to improve their services.
Kevin, we've been down this road before when we're trying to improve literacy in the classrooms. How is this different than what we did in the 90s?
There are some really kind of startling parallels. I mean, Idaho had a reading initiative in 1999, and a lot of the objectives were much the same. It was try to get extra help for kids who are at risk, try to get them more instruction time, try to get teachers more training, more professional development so that they can help the at-risk students. Really, the one vestige of what was rolled out in 1999 that's still in effect is the Idaho Reading Indicator. That's the screening test that the kids take from kindergarten through 3rd grade, and even that's likely to change because State Superintendent Ibarra has opened up the process of trying to get bids to replace the IRI. They're going through 5 proposals right now, and they hope to have a new contract in place by July 1st, contingent on it being funded by the legislature in the next couple of months. So for a lot of educators, I suppose this is kind of deja vu all over again. We've heard this before, we've talked about this before. You gave us the initiative and all you left us with was the test. So, you know, I think there are probably a lot of educators wondering, is this initiative going to have some staying power behind it?
Well, I think the former Superintendent Marilyn Howard, of course, was the one who launched this back during her time, but I think it's still just as fundamental a concern. And I think there's broad agreement. I mean, there's not agreement on a lot of things in education, but certainly there's broad agreement that if kids can't read early in school, they aren't going to be able to learn the material as they get older.
Right.
Dr. Coberly, what are your biggest concerns moving forward?
Well, let me just say this. I'd tag on to what Betsy was saying. It's easier to do prevention than it is to do remediation. And so in our district, I think you probably know we have a partnership with the city to do pre-K, We've seen the early results. They're very positive. That being said, when we get kids in school and they have difficulty with reading, it's complicated. I mean, you have kids that have problems with comprehension, some phonic deficits, sight vocabulary, all sorts of things. They may have a little bit of each one of those. So it's a matter of diagnosing issues and then getting in and doing the work. And that can differ from one student in a group to the next.
What's going to be the most meaningful change for you in helping improve the reading for kindergartners up through 3rd grade from a school level?
Most meaningful change, well, we'll be able to get at the problem early. So even when we have kindergartners that are coming in with some deficits in their language abilities or their identifying letters of the alphabet and letter sounds, etc., we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to work with students that are even a little closer to grade level but not quite there. And that's big. That's a big deal for us because we have a significant number of kids that they may be just 10 sight words away from being a grade level. They might not quite comprehend enough. But I think we'll be able to address a lot of those issues.
Dr. Koberly, what do you think about the IRI being replaced? How well has that test been working for us?
Well, first off, it's been with us a long time. I mean, 2001 or 2000 was the first year, I can't remember which, but it was simple, it was short, it gave us some diagnostic information from which we could take action. It really wasn't intended to be a high-stakes assessment, if you want to put it that way. But you know, it's been used to compare, and we've had data over time that we could compare year over year. And the fact that it's short, a little bit of a concern for me is that we get an assessment that's quite a bit longer for a little kindergartner, where 15 minutes is a long time, and 20 might seem like an eternity. So,
Kevin, bringing it back to the State House, what are the big questions for the 2017 session?
In terms of literacy?
In terms of literacy in this initiative.
I think the biggest question is going to be what sort of funding do we see the next time around, and what sort of reaction do legislators have to the initial reports that they're going to get from the state, because the initial reports that they're going to get is going to be sort of a rundown of here's the landscape, here's what's going on in the districts, here's maybe some anecdotal sense of how it's going, but you know, in terms of looking at data, looking at patterns, that's impossible for anybody to do at this point. And it's going to be a test of political patience. It's going to be a test of political will.
And both the governor and the legislature have really committed to this 5-year plan to improve schools, of which this is a part. And that's a big commitment. The legislature comes in every year and makes new plans. This is a different way of approaching it. We're going into the 3rd year when the biggest ask will be $58 million for the career ladder. I think that's what Representative Horman was referring to. And legislators, even as this is still ramping up, are going to have to put out more money. And so of course we'll see questions, we'll see people wondering about results that may or may not yet be able to be substantiated, and there will be political fights over this.
On the positive side, we have more money than we thought we would have at the end of this fiscal year, so lawmakers will have that. But I'm also hearing some interest in tax cuts. At what expense does that come to education? What's going to sway the minds of lawmakers? And keep in mind, of course, we have some new freshman legislators.
Absolutely. And that's a big question, Aaron. We heard Governor Otter say already that he's not going to propose any tax cuts, and education and the 5-year plan are his #1 priority, #1 focus for this session. We've also heard from the House Republican leadership, well, tax cuts, they're at the top of our agenda. And there have been changes in various committees that might make those more likely. The state is looking at a substantial surplus. It's possible they may be able to do both. There are other priorities out there as well. There are even priorities for doing things like, say, raising the gas tax and further funding our infrastructure needs, and then maybe taking away the increase if the price of gas gets up to $3 again. It's under the assumption that maybe no one will notice it that way. There are any number of things they can do. My experience has been that the legislature tends to fight more when they have more money, because they have more choices.
I think it's going to be a very interesting battle over priorities. I was moderating a panel earlier this week. Dr. Koberly was one of the panelists. Marilyn Whitney from the governor's office was on the panel as well. And when the question of the career ladder came up, she said, not surprisingly, that there are legislators who are listing their top priority as a tax cut. If tax cuts take primacy in the debate over the career ladder, and if there are questions about the effectiveness of the career ladder going into year 3, as Representative Horman alluded to in the soundbite we heard a few minutes ago. This could be a very protracted battle over where that extra money goes. Because Betsy's right, there's plenty of money. The question is, where do you want to put it? And who wins out over in the battle over where that money goes.
And even before this month, there were questions about teacher audits. Are those questions about teacher audits going to undermine the career ladder?
It's hard to say at this point. There have been questions about the quality of the data that's been collected by the state in terms of the evaluations, and we've had kind of the dust up in the past couple of weeks over the audit or desk review, depending on which term you want to use, of the 2014-2015 evaluations. Now you're going to have a whole new round of reviews of the 2015-2016 evaluations. Now that's going to be done by the State Board of Education as opposed to the State Department of Education. But I think you're going to have legislators who are going to be looking at that stuff very, very carefully and very closely. And if you're a legislator who is predisposed to a tax cut first and is maybe looking for an excuse to go that route and to question the career ladder, this may be the out that some of them might be looking for. It's going to be really interesting to watch it all unfold.
Dr. Coberly, I see you kind of smiling and nodding over there. Curious your thoughts and how this process could be improved, not just for the teacher audits, but ultimately to better the students in the classroom.
Well, let me try to encapsulate a bunch of thoughts I was just having. One of the differences between now and 2010, during the battle over the Luna laws, is really that everybody's been working together. So the legislature, the governor's office, the organizations, IASA, ISBA, school boards, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's really been on the same page and working toward the same goal of the career ladder. So that's crucially important to superintendents around the state. And so when this audit came out and said 99% of evaluations were incorrect or incomplete, we said, well, we've got to figure out what's going on. Well, the further we looked into it, the more we found that there were things being asked for that weren't required by code or by state board rule in 2014-15, which were the evaluations that were looked at. And so there have been a couple of things that have come out. We did a blog post, and Ryan Kirby from the legislature wrote a letter just saying, let's verify the accuracies and inaccuracies in this before the legislature gets here, because we know this is really, really important. And superintendents are pretty upset about it.
Where do you think the communication and process could be improved?
Well,
on the State Department level? And just briefly, we're almost out of time.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I'll put it this way. If you're going to appoint a committee and give them the authority to ask these questions, then you have to verify that those questions are accurate before they go to the agency that's doing the audit.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you, Dr. Coberly, Kevin, Betsy, as always, thank you so much. And that's going to do it for us. We're going to take a 2-week hiatus. We'll be back in the new year. Have a great night.
Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.